Millions of buyers are sitting on the real estate fence because they're waiting for the market to turn their way. But at the end of the day, you're ready to buy a house when you're ready to buy a house. When your walls are closing in on your growing family, or when the house is too big because your kids have moved out. When you're sick of paying someone else's mortgage, or when it's time to retire somewhere new. Buyers can't wait for a market shift. They need a clear path forward and wisdom from real people. That's where How to Buy comes in. You'll join me, Leo Ansoliaga, as we hear how to buy stories and advice from real buyers and the professionals who help them along the way in mortgage, real estate, insurance, financial planning, contracting, appraisal, and so much more. Now, let's jump into today's episode. In this episode of How to Buy, I'm joined by Jack Shorb, leader of the Shorb Team, to talk about the home buying process, current market trends, and lessons from his years in real estate. Jack shares how his personal passion have shaped the way he serves clients with energy, discipline, and care. Together, we dig into what buyers need to know to compete in today's market and why creating a smooth process can matter just as much as negotiating a great deal. I hope you enjoy. Well, what a treat it is to have one of my favorite people in the real estate arena, Mr. Jack Shorb, the leader of the Shorb Team, to not only talk about, the process of buying a house, talk about his passion, which A is tennis, all right, B is real estate, and everything else in between. Let's not even forget foodie, but also, give some insight into some of the things he sees on a regular basis when it comes to purchasing a property. Jack, it's so good to have you on.
Leo, this is fun, man. We chat all the time on the phone about the market and what we're seeing. Fun to do this like an official format. I'm excited.
Well, Jack, you and I, have the privilege of serving a lot of clients that are thinking about buying real estate. And, sometimes, if we're honest with each other, that process is almost automatic for us, right? But,
Yeah.
oftentimes, whether it's the first time doing this, the second time doing it, the third time, a client is not going to do this probably more than 5 times in their lifetime. And so not only, do you have a plethora of experience in this industry, but, you've obviously have a history with your family, being in real estate. So before we jump into all things, related to the top 10 things of the tricks or the inside scoop of what it means to invest in real estate, maybe talk a little bit about your background, your story, how you got started, and why this is obviously one of the passions that you have.
Yeah. So I'm a second generation realtor. So my mom's been in the business for a long time. I think she got into the business when I was in middle school. So even growing up, I was kind of immersed in residential real estate, and I'm a third generation Washingtonian. So I had a lot of deep family roots in the area. So I feel like just this real connection to the DC area and Montgomery County specifically, where I'm currently living, and where I also grew up. And I'm living here with my wife now, who's also from Montgomery County. So we're locked in. We're not moving anywhere. But yeah, it's been such a fun career for me. It's We get to work with people in such a special time of their life, and I really kind of focus my business on people buying and selling their primary residence.
Mm.
That's kind of what we specialize in, is whether it's families or individuals that are looking to buy their first house or downsize. We really specialize in helping fit someone's search criteria
Mm.
to what that person's lifestyle is going to be like, and what they're looking for, and having just that deep rooted connection with the area, and growing up around my mom, who's an amazing agent. I just feel like we're really well qualified to help people with that, and it's been It's been a joy.
Yeah, I mean, and let's be honest, you do this with a ton of joy, and not only does it show, but you have built a very impressive practice in real estate, to the point where you have a team of people that you work with and are serving a lot of clients on a yearly basis in this area. And I think what a great person to kind of pick their brain on as it relates to that process of purchasing a home, right? A lot of times, let's be honest, people are super nervous of this because, like we said before, that this is not, the thing that they do every single day. And so, you know, as we kind of get going here, maybe let's start with, some insight in terms of, okay, why the heck should we invest in real estate in the first place, right? I think fundamentally speaking, there's a lot of noise out there about the market, about interest rates, about whether we should do this or not do this, keep renting, or maybe let go of that primary residence, like you said, that we have that has a very low rate when we know that we need to obviously buy a new one because our family is growing. So talk a little bit about the timing piece.
Yeah.
What is it that you're saying to your clients regarding that point?
Yeah, so because we work so much with people buying their primary residence, rather than, an investor who might look at entering the market from more of like a, trying to time the market perspective,
Mm,
we really feel that when you're buying a home for yourself, it should be less market driven and more about your circumstances.
mm,
So we really feel that the primary driver for buying your new primary residence and moving into that kind of product should really just be, what's going on with your life. Um,
mm,
is being in a certain neighborhood going to impact your life positively? Maybe a certain school district. Is your family outgrowing your current home? And that should really be the driver of purchasing, more so than, as an investor, of course, you're really just looking at the numbers. And while we help our clients make good real estate investments as their primary, residence is a big investment, the why usually for what we see a lot of clients is something more nuanced to what's going on in their personal life.
mm,
And we want to, we're meeting with clients, that's one of the first things we really drill down on is, what is leading to this move for you? Why now? And usually what we hear is those things I was mentioning, right? It's I want to be in the school district, or I want to have a yard for my dog, whatever it is, right? So that's usually a driving factor as the lead. And then secondarily is let's also make sure while doing that we're making, a good investment.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up because a lot of the clients that we talk to, one of the questions that we ask on a regular basis is like, look, and we say, look, nobody wakes up on a Saturday morning and says, I'm going to go buy a piece of real estate. They've been thinking about this, right? And the timing piece is always a question that comes up, right? Should I do this now? Should I wait? I think interest rates are going to be coming down in the future. What does that mean for you? And they always ask the same question: when should I do this? And the answer is simple. I think to your point, it's like when it makes sense for you, right? When
Yeah.
it makes sense for you. And I think that piece of wisdom that you just dropped here is so critical because ultimately at the end of the day, this is a bespoke process tied to your specific needs and goals.
100%. I mean, when my wife and I moved to Bethesda, just out of DC, it wasn't we were trying to, make the best investment of all time. We just wanted a yard, and we just wanted to be in this area where we spend most of our time, where most of our friends were.
Mm,
And I think that a lot of people do realize that when they're buying. But I do just think it's an important conversation people should have with themselves and think, am I moving because of a reason in my life that's really helpful to my life and going to make a big impact if I move? And if that's really the reason you're moving, like, don't try to time the market. That's not why you're moving. If you're doing that, then buy an investment property.
mm. Yeah, and I think to your point, it's those little things that sometimes we overlook because there's so much noise. There's so much noise out there about real estate in general. But at the end of
Yeah.
the day, the market itself proves itself to be proves itself to be correct, right? Like the market is the market, and real estate has appreciated over the last 63 years in this area at a rate of return of 4.43% year over year. So, you know, if you say, hey, we're going to do this for about a year and then flip this property, like you said, I mean, probably keep renting or probably keep the property that you have. But if you're looking at, investing in real estate because you have a growing family, you need a yard for your dog, or, things are obviously changing, that's the right timing for you. Now, it's intimidating though. I mean, let's be honest, to talk to someone like you. I mean, right? Like to talk like someone like me. And oftentimes what people struggle with in the category of timing, Jack, is engaging a professional early in this process. One of the things that I always say to clients is the timing is the rule of 50%, right? And when they're like, what does that mean? Well, if you're thinking about investing in real estate, and let's say hypothetically say your timeline is about 12 months. The rule of 50% literally says that it's probably half of that, right? It's probably half of that time frame, because your reticular activator, the part of your brain that obviously looks at things that matter to you, is already engaged. And oftentimes, what happens is that people find the right house, the unicorn that they love, and they're not ready. So, talk a little bit about preparation, Jack. Like, why is it so important to be prepared, and what are some of the steps that you would recommend in that process?
Yeah, so when I have friends that come up to me and tell me that they're thinking about, their next move, the first thing I always say to them is if they're getting a loan, which a lot of people are, it's expensive market to buy real estate without one. So I'll usually tell people like, hey, don't talk to me. Let's get you in front of an amazing local mortgage advisor who can walk you through the process and just see like what's possible right now. Because without that piece, you're kind of dreaming about buying a house, which is fun. Like you can look on Zillow all you want, but if you're really getting that feeling where you're going to ask people, "Hey, I'm starting to think about it," you're vocalizing this to the world. That probably means that you're ready to start talking to some people about this and working towards that reality. And for some reason, people just always procrastinate that step. So I even address that with them, and I'm like, I know even when I'm saying this that you're going to say, oh, yeah, I'll do that. You're going to wait 2 months, but like, please just go do that. Because as soon as people do, this like huge weight's lifted off their shoulders. Because, when you're looking at homes in a neighborhood, you might see a home's like $1 million or $2 million. And you're like, I don't have that much cash set aside. What does that even, how do I even make that happen? And when you work with a good mortgage professional, they're able to break that down for you into bite-sized steps so
Mm.
that you can start looking at a house as a monthly payment and not just this one bulk number. So that is extremely important to do as early as possible because it'll just help you accelerate that timeline. And if you still end up waiting a year or two to till you find the right house, that's great. But if you do find that amazing house sooner than then, you want to just be ready to make a move.
Yeah, and I was talking to past clients on the previous podcast, Johnny and Jess, and that's one of the pieces that that Jess brought forward, right? She was like, look, the reason why I was so hesitant to talk to you, Leo, is because the moment we talked to you, this thing became really very real very fast, right? And she said, but what I realized is that had we had spoken to you earlier, we probably would have been more prepared when the right opportunity came into play, right? And so
Right.
it's very interesting to me, the hesitation, and I understand why, right? Nobody walks up in the streets and looks at a person's randomly and says, "Hey, I want to pull your credit. I want to actually check your FICO score. Like, what is the actual, what is your actual like credit score? What is Experian reporting?" Right? That's kind of weird. That's very personal
Sure.
information. But at the end of the day, we definitely need the visibility that we that is required by the agencies to give, like you talked about, proper guidance. And the earlier you start that process, right? Keep in mind the rule of 50%, right? The better, because once you start navigating the properties online, once you see the property in Bethesda that checks 90% of the boxes, Jack is going to essentially say to you, hey, listen, if we have any shot at this, we're going to have to like drive extremely fast to the finish line here. And oftentimes that creates unnecessary stress.
I totally agree. And Leo, how much does it cost to have an intro call with a lender?
A lot. No, just kidding. No, it's free. It's free. And I think, look, you like Jack said, you have to work with whom you feel most comfortable with, right? At the end of the day, doing your due diligence is important, right? Getting a referral from someone you trust, extremely important, right? We just so happen to have a great working relationship with Jack and his team, because we have, essentially parallel processes to this equation. But that doesn't mean that you have to work with Leo. That doesn't mean that you have to speak with us. We definitely would love an opportunity to have that conversation. But whoever it is, whatever mortgage professional is out there, you want to make sure you start that process as early as possible because there is no commitment in having that conversation. It's just the most efficient way to do this, especially if you're thinking about purchasing a property.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I think going through the pre-approval process is like the biggest gift to a home buyer. Like they get so much information and so
Mm.
much advice up front, that's going to really like shape and mold their whole buyer journey. And I would get people delaying if it costs, 20K to do that, but it's free. You got to do
Got to
it.
do it. You got to do it. But but to that point, and kind of piggybacking on what you just said, once you get over that hurdle, then you really start getting into the nitty gritty of this search, right?
Yep.
One of the things that I always say is that buying a house is not a process of selection; it's a process of elimination, and
Yep.
you eliminate based on three very specific criteria: location, style, and price. And I always quote the National Association of Realtors statistic that says that, look, you're never going to find a property that's going to meet 100% of your criteria because the moment you move in, you're going to make about 15% changes in that property. So the goal here is to look for something that meets about 85% of your criteria, right? Now, that process also takes time, Jack, right? And there's a lot of gaps that a lot of consumers are not aware of, right? Getting clarity on the criteria for couples, getting clarity on the criteria that buyers are looking for, whether it's an individual, couples, etc. Walk us through that because that is also a fun part, but also a heavy lift in this entire equation.
I agree. And it should be a fun part. And it can be a heavy lift if there's disagreements. But usually we work it out. So I think especially with couples, it's important that both parties do an exercise like what I'm gonna explain here separately, and then come together to share each list, and look it over and see if there's any differences. Because what we find is if couples do this together,
Mm.
um, sometimes they'll just kind of agree and then down the line be like, you know what, I actually really do want this or don't want this, and I just didn't say it earlier. So it's good to get all that down up front so that you guys can align as early as possible in the search. So basically the exercise that we have clients do is separately we have them write down a list of just everything they could possibly want in this next home, whether that's like dream stuff that they might not feel like they can get, and just kind of write it all out and then go through and circle from that list what each person individually thinks are like their non-negotiables.
Mm.
At least at the start, what they feel like their non-negotiables are. People like things that they really wouldn't even think about moving unless these criteria were checked in that new home.
Mm.
Those are the items that you actually should come together and see where you differ, at all. And sometimes there are some disagreements there. And if that happens, then we want to prioritize, are there anything on that list that can't be changed, right? You might have a disagreement on wanting a detached house versus a condo. So that's something that we really need to address up front and have conversations about. But you might have something like, hey, I really want the house to be have like modern light fixtures or have two bathrooms upstairs. Well, we might be able to find a single family home where maybe for the short term we have one bathroom upstairs, and let's say you're family planning and at some point you're going to want a second bathroom. Let's look at that, maybe bring an architect in to see if down the line that's something that could be possible with that home. So what we really want to prioritize going up front is, all right, non-negotiables. Let's see if we're aligned on those. And then if we're not, are those things that we can eventually change about the house down the line? Because if that's true, then we can probably still move forward and find something that's going to be a good fit, at least in the short term.
Yeah, and I love that process of elimination because ultimately, as cheesy as this might sound, flexibility really is your best ability, right? And
Yeah.
so at the end of the day, like, there are wants and needs. And the moment we can get clear on that, the moment we can get clear on that, the better it is in this entire process. Because, frustration is always the result of unmet expectations, right? I can't tell you how many times, I've seen clients come to our practice that have not had this conversation, prior to with their agent, right? And let's be honest, maybe the agent that they're working with is brand new. Maybe this is not, the current clients that they're currently serving. Maybe their process is different. But regardless, this is one of the most critical pieces that needs to be addressed up front because before you know it, right, if you don't have alignment on the criteria that you're describing, we don't really necessarily have movement.
Right. No, 100%. Yeah, it's a really important exercise to do up front because it really does frame your whole search. So once you have that list and your pre-approval, then you're kind of in a good spot to chat with an agent. Those are probably some of the first things I would do before speaking to an agent.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And let's touch a little bit on this because I think, a lot of buyers, don't necessarily, time frames, right? Like, I mean, oftentimes we're so accustomed to this microwave society. They're like, yeah, well, I'm going to find an agent. I'm going to get, a mortgage advisor or a professional to give me a pre-approval, and I'm going to go buy the house.
Yeah.
Jack, that doesn't take 5 minutes. I mean, that's a good chunk of time. How long, like, does that process usually take, right? How long do you start to see that process of elimination become more clear? Because I think a time frame here would be helpful.
Yeah, and are you asking in terms of when from the time people start engaging with, a lender, an agent, when they end up usually buying a house?
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes a lot of people are not sure like how long they should obviously have, right? But more
Yeah.
importantly, in the process of elimination, I mean, that could take not just an hour, that could take a week. You know what I mean? That could take, a
Yeah.
couple of weeks depending on what they're looking for. So give us some insight in terms of just generic timeline.
Sure, yeah. I'll tell you what I'm usually seeing with clients is I think getting through the process of being ready to see homes, if you're pretty committed to this and you're on like a short timeline, you can easily get that done in a week or 2 weeks. But how long it's going to take you to find the right home does depend on a few different factors. I would say the biggest of those being just how comfortable you are around the inventory you're going to be looking at. So if you're not from the area, let's say, and you're relocating, which we definitely help a lot of clients do, that can take a lot longer because they're starting from I don't even know what neighborhood I want to be in, or even maybe what state I'm going to be in. So that does add a whole level of complexity to it. But for those that are, local or even for people moving from out of area that have a pretty, they know what they want. They're like, I want, a single family home, 10-minute walk to Bethesda. Then really it's just going to be when the right type of product comes up in your criteria that you're excited about. And that just depends on when that product comes up and when you're feeling ready to buy. I'd say general timeline is most of our clients by the time they meet with us end up getting under contract within 1 to 3 months. Uh,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it depends. We do work with a lot of clients well in advance of their purchase, which I also really love because then we get to start watching the market with them well in advance and really start to it gives us a long runway to look at products together and really refine that down. But there's no
Yeah.
right answer. There's no right answer.
Yeah. And you're being super modest because I know your process, how dialed in your process really is. And for you to be able to, kind of give a general timeline like that
Yeah.
speaks volumes of all of the work your team has done to lay out the predictable process of what it looks like to serve clients in this journey, right? One of the things that our team loves about working with your team is how those two processes kind of overlap, right? Because to your point, right? Um, preparation is literally the key in the name of the game here. Execution, very important. Making sure these clients are prepared is super, super important. Talk a little bit about process because I think at the end of the day, they're hiring you, yes, your practice, absolutely, but most importantly, they're hiring the process that you all have refined over the years.
Yeah, well, one thing I love about having a process for our team, we have a buyer and seller process, but talking with you, I'm going to focus on the buy side today. I would say on the buy side, what it allows us to do is really focus on our clients' needs and our customer service because we know in the back end there's this process that we're following that we don't have to question if it's going to work or not, right? So it allows us to riff off of it with the current client where we feel appropriate, but we're not reinventing the wheel with every single client, right? We do the same basic flow with every client, and that structure allows us to constantly be perfecting it and also give each client like an amazing experience every time.
Yeah, and I think that's super critical because, as a mentor of mine once said is this, right? Buying real estate, is an emotional process justified logically, right? And we make emotional purchases uh, that we justify logically later. Now, here's the deal. We have to be responsible adults, that are looking at our finances, not paying more than what we can obviously afford. That's a given. But at the end of the day, like, that emotional drive, right? Our kid is on it. We have a new kid on the way. We have a new puppy. Our family is expanding. Those are legitimate things that are outside of just the payment and the rate or, the actual color of the door. This is literally a home. And to have a process in place that creates boundaries, and lanes for the clients is extremely, extremely important.
Yeah, I totally agree. And one in terms of that, I'd love to talk a bit more about the financing side. I think there's two of those topics I wanted to talk about were gift funds, which we see a lot in this area, as well as just costs outside of people's mortgage payment. In terms of gift funds, what advice do you have, or what are some things people should think about when they are getting funds from a trust or family when buying real estate?
Yeah, I mean, I think gift funds are a legit question, right? A lot of the wealth transfer that's happening right now, from one generation to the other, literally is warranting a lot of gifts
Yeah,
coming into these processes. And you and I work a lot with financial advisors,
yeah,
that have these questions on a regular basis, right? There are, annual gift fund limits, in terms of a taxable event both on an annual basis and also lifetime. And those change over the years, they go up and down. But the way a lender looks at a gift fund is simply this, right? It's very common. It's very, very common in a high cost area today, to see the cost of real estate go up and parents or grandparents wanting to help, their family members, with this purchase. So oftentimes we will see, parents or grandparents wire funds over to the actual borrower for them to purchase the property. And the way we treat this is essentially it's just any other source of funds, right? There's certain guidelines that need to be followed, right? Those gifts need to be obviously sourced. We need to know
right,
where it's coming from. There needs to be a proper gift letter in place. And in terms of the actual taxable event of those gifts, obviously we lean heavily on the CPAs and the financial advisors to guide them. But we
right,
also understand how the actual tax code works. And so, functionally speaking, though, those gift funds are usually transferred over to the client in advance or to the title company primarily in advance to mitigate a lot of the paperwork that's required in that process. And I wrote an entire blog on this that I'll put in the show notes at the very bottom, to kind of go through some of the tips and tools on that. But gift funds are legit. They're actually a very common thing these days, and that's
right.
what the majority of the agencies are looking for.
Yeah, no, that's super helpful. Yeah, we've been seeing it a lot. I feel like for people, grandparents, parents in a position to give money, or want to give money, I think a lot of people see it as such an impactful way to help the generation below them in such a meaningful way to get into home ownership in a time where it is really expensive for this generation to get into their first property. And instead of just writing them a check, helping helping them get into the real estate game, it feels like just a really awesome thing for people to do. So we are seeing a lot of it, I feel like, rather than waiting for, estates down the line, being able to gift that money when kids really need it, trying to get into their first home. We're totally seeing it a lot. One tip in terms of that I found to be really helpful is you need your pre-approval, but I think people need their like gift fund pre-approval too. A lot of people will have like a casual conversation with like, hey, when you go to buy your house, like I'll help you out, right? It's like, well, what does that mean? How much money is available to them? Because if we don't know that, and that's a large source of the down payment or cash to close, that ends up being a huge question mark for buyers as they're looking. And we've seen buyers that miss out on homes because they're nervous to have that conversation with their family, which is totally fair. We would just encourage people like, hey, if someone is going to do that, it's really good to have that conversation up front, just so that when you go talk to your lender, you know how much money that you have for that payment. Otherwise, that's a huge question mark that's going to delay your process.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying is like, look, we're not asking you to go talk to your parents and be like, I need a gift, right? But if they've obviously like mentioned something in the past and that's in the back of your mind already, we don't want to be surprised with this at the ninth hour, at the last minute. Instead, we want to be proactive in making sure that that piece is in place. Because here's the key, one little hurdle, right? The majority of the donors that are giving these gifts are not going to want to provide their bank statements to source the actual funds. And here's the deal, there's some guidelines that exist out there that depending on, based on how they give you those funds, meaning based on whether or not they write you a check and give it to you and you deposit in your account, a couple of guidelines require us to request, the bank statements from the donor. And it's been my experience over the last 20 plus years that most parents or most grandparents are not going to want to do that. So how do you
Yeah.
avoid that? Well, you typically have the parents wire the funds directly to the title attorney that is representing this particular contract. And once that obviously is held in their account, all we need to do at that point is just source the actual transfer, not necessarily get the actual bank statements. It's little things like that that Jack is talking about that prevent us from obviously creating additional hurdles for you. And I think gift funds are critical because the cost of home ownership has gone up, right? There's a lot of fees, there's a lot of upfront costs that are in play, right? And I want to touch a little bit on this because, as prices continue to go up, Jack, you're going to have real estate taxes, right? Uncle Sam's going to be a part of every one of these transactions. That's a factor that we need to consider. And so having all of those questions up front, making sure that we are obviously itemizing what those fees will look like up front, understanding not just what your payment looks like, but what does your bottom line look like up front is extremely important as you go through this process because we don't want to be blindsided by this later down the road.
Yeah, I totally agree. And you guys do a great job of putting a little buffer there too, so that hopefully at closing table you have a nice surprise for the buyers. It's a little less, just based on estimates for insurance, some things that you don't know up front. Um, so having, working with a lender that also knows the area where you're looking well is super important because we've seen out of
Mhm.
area lenders sometimes not know the nuances of the market and the tax structure, and you end up getting a surprise at closing, which is not fun. You're already dishing out a lot of money at closing. You don't want any last minute surprises. And then on top of that, right, I think a lot of first time home buyers specifically, it's really important that you're working with someone that knows what it costs to do things in a property, because when you own a home and there's no blinds in the house, it's an expensive cost that you're going to have, right? And if you need to do touch up paint, refinish floors before you move in, add new
Mhm.
light fixtures, you're going to have a moving company likely. So there's a lot of stuff right after closing that you're going to get hit with another expense. So I just encourage buyers, hey, like let's make sure that we have a little bit of money reserved aside for kind of those flip expenses when you take over the property. Because often before you move in is a great time to do fresh paint and refinish floors before all your furniture is in the house.
Yeah, and I think, what a great, what a great segue to that because I think, to your point, that is the reason why you hire a professional to give you that insight, right? Like a trained eye such as yours that can literally say, look, it's probably gonna, and most buyers do this, by the way, right? They're like, oh my gosh, this is gonna be a $35,000 expense. You're like, no, not really. If we do this and this and this, and we have the proper contractor in place, this is probably not gonna be that huge of an expense. But having a trained eye that can literally guide you through those costs that you probably haven't thought through,
Yeah.
super, super critical.
And sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes someone goes, "Oh, this bathroom will cost 5 grand." I'm like, "No, no, no, much more."
Yeah. Let's close out with a couple of like fast pace, things here, Jack. Let talk a little bit about, your search criteria, right? You always talk about making sure that your actual search criteria is not too narrow at first, right?
Yep.
Can you talk a little bit about what that principle that you teach your clients on a regular basis?
Yep, absolutely. So in terms of criteria, when we put filters on a search, we have to remember that those are, limiting criteria. So if we put, no more or at least 3 bedrooms, we're not going to see any 2 bedroom properties. And that's why it's important to have that really refined list of your dream list and why all those things are on your dream list, right? Because if you really just want a bedroom, a guest bedroom, and an office, what if there's like a really nice basement setup or a den on that first floor we could use for an office? So we want to make sure that we're not being overly restrictive with our criteria to make sure that we're not missing the ability to just look at an option in our search. And that goes to price as well. It is smart to look slightly over your target budget. If a home's been on the market for just a week or so,
Mm,
let's not pay attention to that because it's likely going to it's we're not likely not going to be able to negotiate it to where we want it to be. But if something's been sitting for a few months, if it's over your budget, that's that's very likely a property we can negotiate on. Now, it's going to depend on the seller and how willing to negotiate they are, but sometimes it's worth a shot. Sometimes buyers are surprised, or even we're surprised by how low a seller is willing to go to get out of a property that they're no longer interested in holding on to.
the last piece I want to talk about today is having, the right team in place, right? The right proper team. You and I have an affinity towards each other, not because, we obviously like one another. We have similar hobbies, etc. But specifically because of the overall process and the similarities of that. So talk about that for a second. Talk about why it's important to have the correct, not just mortgage professional individually and real estate agent individual, but an actual team behind you in this process.
Yeah, I think having someone that does have a process is really important because it'll just make sure that you'll feel if someone doesn't have a process when you're going through a transaction as a
Mm,
consumer. Things will feel scattered and disorganized, and at the end of each meeting, your person that you're working with won't be like, "Oh, here's what's next," and
mm,
that doesn't create a good sense of confidence and feeling of security when you're making such a big purchase. You really want to be working with a team that is really knowledgeable about what they're doing, has a lot of
mm.
experience doing it, so that they've seen likely some scenarios that you might run into. And then that process is just the backbone behind the whole thing, just to make sure that you have a really good experience with such an important decision that you're making. So it's very important, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, we always talk about on our end, the 10, 40, 50, right? 10% of this entire process really is during the transaction, right? So we have to be able to fulfill, the promises that we've made, right? Making sure that you have, a great and competitive rate. It's important. That's a given. That's part of
Yeah.
the job, right? Making sure that you close on time. God forbid, like, that's a given. We need to make sure we close on time and following through on everything you say you're going to do. But most people are always talking about that during process. That's 10%, I would argue, of the entire piece. 40% is the preparation that happens before. 40% is making sure that we, as our practice, is going to prepare the clients, similar to you, right? On all of the variables that you're going to see in this particular process in advance, right? Appraisal gap strategies. What is that? What is the actual strategy around that? Buyer agency gap strategy. Offer strategies, right? Bid over ask models, right? What is all of these things that you perhaps have not thought through? We don't want to find out those variables during the transaction because oftentimes we don't have that much time. So
Right.
making sure we have proper preparation is key. But then the last piece, 50% of it is after. What happens after, right? In most practices, most institutions, what they'll just drop you. They'll say, "Hey, listen, thank you so much. It was a pleasure working with you." But there's no real plan, like you said, after the fact. How are we going to continue to serve our clients to create lifetime value for them long term? Well, we have a client concierge service internally that's going to be there at every single step of the process with you, even after you close. Because at the end of the day, we want to make sure that you're successful homeowners even after you purchase this home. And so having the correct team that understands those pieces is super critical. But to your point earlier, Jack, it's also people that have had the reps to not just hit fastballs. Everybody always talks about all the wins that they've had. But man, there's got to be people that can hit curveballs because everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. That's what Mike Tyson said, right? And in real estate, there's some variables, right? You need to align yourself with people that have hit those variables, that understand when they're coming, but most importantly, have a plan and a process to address them.
I totally agree. I mean, most of the bad or difficult transactions that we've gone through together, we just jump right in together and get aligned on a strategy and fix it and make it happen. And I can think of a handful of situations where I haven't been able to work with you on a deal because let's say the buyer had someone that was a family friend, whatever. And when I don't have you as a partner and something goes wrong, it's a mess. It's a mess. So I think you're right. Some people will not realize how important it is to have someone good until, as you said, you get punched in the face, something goes wrong. And that's when it really shines that or really shows how important it is to have someone trusted in your back pocket. And not only with potential problems that can come up, but one just bonus thing like to bring up that buyers should think about is the strategies around structuring your loan in different ways.
Mm,
One thing I love working with you is when I send clients over, you're able to really break down for them different options and scenarios of how to structure a loan to benefit their specific financial picture. And I
mhm.
think a lot of lenders when they get reached out to by a client, they just spit back a pre-approval with how much cash they put in their form. And that's not helpful. There's so many ways to structure that and ways to think about how are we preserving your cash and is what's more important to you, lowering your monthly payment or preserving more cash in your bank account? And there's some really creative ways you can structure offers in that regard. I think for some reason there is a misconception about closing cost credits, and I think they're one of the most valuable tools that buyers can use. For most people, let's say 2-3% of the purchase price for closing costs is probably much better spent in your savings or invested in the stock market than reducing that monthly payment over like let's say a 30-year loan. That's that cash, if you're buying $1 million house, 25K cash, right? That's probably going to be more valuable to you than the equal reduction in your monthly payment. And I feel like when we're able to work on those clients together and help explain the different nuances of that, it can really unlock just some great financial opportunities for our clients to make sure that they're structuring the deal in a way that's most attuned to what their goals are.
What a great point, because I think to your point here, most mortgage professionals look at a mortgage as just a payment and a rate, right? And that's important. Don't get me wrong. I think, you need to have a competitive price. You need to have a competitive, a rate. That makes perfect sense. I'm a consumer too. I understand that, right? That said, a mortgage is much more than just a payment or rate. It's literally one slice of your overall financial picture. Taxes, investments. If you're a business owner, how does this affect your overall business? Insurance, right? And so we look at the mortgage more holistically, similar to what a financial advisor would look at, right? And we say, okay, how does this entire thing fit together? Because safety and liquidity is important. How can we structure this with the help of our partner, Jack and his team, and say, okay, hey, it would make more sense for us to preserve this cash in the market because it's compounding at a much higher rate of return than for us to essentially lower our monthly payment by $100 or $200 per month. Here's what I'm thinking. It's that collaboration is literally valuable beyond valuable because it's those little things that not only, help you get an amazing home, but ultimately make a good sound financial investment that you're not going to regret later,
which we love.
which we love, which we love. Well, Jack, this was such a treat, man. What a masterclass, rapid fire of all things related, to buying real estate. How can the audience find you? Where can they find you online, Jack?
Yeah, absolutely. So I post a lot on LinkedIn. So just my name, Jack Shorb. And then we also are on Instagram at the Shorb Team. And if you search my name, hopefully Google will show me your info, or I'm not doing a good job of marketing.
Awesome. Well, it was a pleasure having you, Jack. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Leo. That was really fun. Appreciate it, man.